of all the places in China it could have broken out, is Wuhan, at the doorstep of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And this seems to be hardly a coincidence.
In the event that it did emerge naturally, it's a really mad, mental coincidence, isn't it? It's like, that's weird, isn't it, that natural virus came out of there. Like, if you had paint all over you and you worked at Dulux, you're like, oh, what happened today at Dulux? Nothing. Oh, I had a good day at the old Dulux. Yeah, but you're covered in paint. Oh, no, that happened in nature. I was out in nature and a bat flew by and it must have had some Dulux on it, I suppose, because as you can see, I'm covered in it. A new report inquires as to the origins of the coronavirus. Did it occur in nature or did it emerge, perhaps accidentally, from a laboratory? What is happening around this story? Why is this subject so contentious? Is there a deliberate attempt to obscure the facts of the origins of the coronavirus, or should we trust science and the accepted reporting?
It is absolutely accurate. The intelligence community does not know exactly where, when, or how COVID-19 virus was transmitted initially. But we're continuing to work on this issue and collect information.
The article was written by Nicholas Wade. We're going to be using an interview that he gave on Sky Television and using pieces of the original article. For the purposes of clarity and the kind of transparency that I would like to see in all media, I have to tell you that some people dispute the contents of this article. Anthony Fauci and Rand Paul have had a debate about its contents, and there's a clip of that in here also. And many other scientists query the evidence at the level of microbiology, let alone at the level of literature and writing. So let's go into this knowing that Nicholas Wade asserts these things. Some people strongly deny what Nicholas Wade is asserting.
The Chinese virologists were doing the same as virologists all around the world. They were doing a very dangerous category of experiments called gain of function. And that's where you soup up a natural animal virus to try and see what sort of a few tweaks it might need to become a human pathogen. And the rationale for this is, well, if we can get a few steps ahead of nature, then that will help us prevent the next pandemic.
There are two main theories around the emergence of coronavirus, and there is no irrefutable evidence around either of those theories. You'll probably be familiar with them. One is that it came from a wet market. Chinese authorities reported that many cases had occurred in the wet market in Wuhan. There had been an epidemic in 2002 in which a bat virus had first spread to civets and then from civets to people. A similar bat virus caused the second epidemic known as MERS in 2012. According to this article, the wet market connection was soon broken when Chinese researchers found earlier cases in Wuhan with no links at all to the wet market. Now, I suppose where this becomes complicated, and I remember knowing this from the beginning, like way back in early 2020, when we were all sort of bewildered and overwhelmed by this extraordinary new global event. I remember hearing, like I'm sure all of you did, there's an institute... There's an Institute of Virology in Wuhan where they're studying viruses. Okay, you probably remember hearing that. And I remember feeling that it was sort of somehow taboo to talk about that institute being there. But the fact is that Wuhan is the home of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And if you're going to have a Wuhan Institute of Virology, where better to have it than Wuhan? Now, this is the kind of aspect of the story that interests me and inspires the most questions in me. From early on, the public and media perceptions were shaped in favour of the natural emergence scenario by strong statements from two scientific groups. This idea that the media can shape perceptions is obviously something we're hugely interested in. What is the function of media? Well, the word literally suggests that it's a channel through which information can travel, but those of us that are adults recognise that that information is presented in ways that are favourable to particular outcomes, that media can be persuasive. That's why there are different strains of media. This type of media is preferable if you've got those kind of political views. This type of media is favourable if you have these type of political views. I'm trying, as I'm sure you are too, to have some understanding of the truth, both an inner truth about myself and, as best as I can, some kind of objectivity about the world around me, and increasingly that becomes difficult. Now, this is a relatively unique event, an event that's affecting everybody everywhere in the world that's only occurred recently. So the kind of impetus to shape and control this information is a strong one. The letter that first emerged that the writer of this article is critiquing had a group of scientists, signatories, and the provenance of this article we'll discuss in a second. A group of virologists and others wrote this in The Lancet, February 19th, 2020. It said, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin. Scientists overwhelmingly conclude that this coronavirus originated in wildlife." This article alleges that the Lancet letter had been organised and drafted by Peter Daszak, president of the Eco-Health Alliance in New York. Daszak's organisation funded coronavirus research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Like, for me, that's the most significant and interesting aspect of this article. And some people contest the way that that funding reached the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Potentially, it didn't reach there at all, or otherwise it may have gone through a series of different groups, subcommittees, sub-bodies. But it seems that there is at least an argument that funding from the United States of America found its way into the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Do you still support sending money to the Wuhan Virology Institute?
We do not send money now to the Wuhan Virology
Do you support
Institute.
sending money? We did under your tutelage. We were sending it through EcoHealth. It was a sub-agency and a sub-grant. Do you support that the money from NIH that was going to the Wuhan Institute?
Let me explain to you why that was done.
Of course, I don't know enough about scientific procedure to know whether it's normal, ordinary, acceptable, necessary to experiment with viruses in this way. Of course, my emotional response to hearing that people create viruses and then experiment on them is a kind of an anxious one. But, you know, again, I don't really like the idea of animal trials, but there are all sorts of necessary aspects of science that I'm not qualified to comment on. What does seem to be true is that there is an institute in Wuhan where experimenting on viruses, creating new viruses, is a part of what they do there, if not the sole function, as far as I know. Now, this is a sensitive subject and one that I have to handle with a great degree of caution. One, because these kind of videos get taken down, and also because I don't want to assert things that are untrue or uncertain. For me, the biggest area of inquiry and the matter of supreme interest is how this could potentially affect public attitudes towards science, even beyond the huge disciplines of virology and epidemiology.
A group of scientists wrote in The Lancet, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." Why would they have said that?
Well, there would be tremendous blowback from the public if this virus turned out to have been created in a lab.
This aspect of Wade's article, I suppose, is perhaps the crux of the matter. If SARS-2 had indeed escaped from such a laboratory experiment, a savage blowback could be expected, and the storm of public indignation would affect virologists everywhere, not just in China. It would shatter the scientific edifice from top to bottom, an MIT Technology Review editor Antonio Regalado said in March 2020. There are two theories. One is that coronavirus emerged from nature, that nobody is culpable. Two, that coronavirus emerged from a laboratory, and therefore some institutions, organisations, nations, individuals are culpable. I suppose that's a significant difference because it brings to mind an argument that's existed in human consciousness from as early as we began to experiment on a large scale scientifically, perhaps right back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the idea that man meddling in what would have been referred to as God's domain could have potentially dangerous side effects. Of course, all of us are hugely grateful to advances in medicine and technology. The world is unthinkable without those advances. We live in the cradle of science now. The challenge comes when and if science errs and the consequences are on a hitherto unseen scale. How do we approach that? There are further questions, of course, if there isn't transparency and honesty. And whichever theory is true, whether it emerged from nature or whether it emerged from a laboratory in Wuhan, it seems to me that there ought to be clear, transparent conversations about it. That if one theory is promoted and another theory suppressed, then it's difficult not to draw the conclusion that people in positions of power or powerful institutions have a preference about which theory is given prominence, which potential truth is given most value.
What were the safety precautions at the Wuhan Institute of Virology actually like?
All around the internet, you can see these photographs of Dr. Zhengli Shi, the chief Chinese scientist, or Bat Lady, as she called. She was an expert in coronaviruses. She's wearing this bubble suit and working in a BSL-4 lab, so it all looks like it was safe. But in fact, all her experiments were done in a much lower level of safety, about the level required in a US dentist's.
Right, lay back, open your mouth. There's some coronavirus. Say ah!
Dentist's office, according to one description. That's BSL-2, and basically you just put up a notice saying biohazard, and you wear gloves and a coat.
It's one thing to query science as a model, investigation, experimentation, studying facts, exploring new frontiers. But of course science, and Big Pharma in particular, exist with powerful economic interests and have alliances with significant, powerful global figures with incredible influence on the global stage. So sometimes when you're questioning science, particularly if science has erred, you are directly opposing the interests of some of the world's most powerful people. One of the problems around science is not science itself, the model of investigation, but the relationship between science, finance, and economics. You know, in a sense, it shows us that the way that you would ideally not have money involved in politics through lobbying, you would not have money involved in science through the funding of research and investigation. Science, precisely because it is such an important, vital endeavour, has responsibilities that you might apply in areas such as religion, theology. It has strong ethical requirements. If science and finance are inextricably linked, then you are likely to get challenges that are at odds with science's empirical principles, because you can't serve science and mammon at the same time.
If in the course of her experiment she created a virus that was far more infectious than she had expected, and given the fact that she had tried but failed to develop a vaccine against the viruses she was working with, it will be no surprise if the virus had escaped from her lab.
In the event that it did emerge naturally, as we were all instructed to believe quite assertively from early on, it's a really mad, mental coincidence, isn't it? It's like, that's weird, isn't it, that natural virus came out of there. Like, if you had paint all over you and you worked at Dulux, you're like, oh, what happened today at Dulux? Nothing. Oh, it's a good day at the old Dulux. Yeah, but you're covered in paint. Oh, no, that happened in nature. I was out in nature and a bat flew by and it must have had some Dulux on it, I suppose, because as you can see, I'm covered in it. I'm not saying it's impossible. That could have happened.
And since the pandemic did indeed break out in Wuhan, of all the places in China it could have broken out, is Wuhan, at the doorstep of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And this seems to be hardly a coincidence. It's not proof. Evolution does all kinds of things we don't expect, but it just makes it very likely, when you take it in conjunction with all the other evidence, that this is a virus manipulated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
I suppose a few things that come up as a result of this recent article, contested though it may be, that there are challenges around science, the funding of science, the objectives of science, and the caution that's practiced around areas of science that if we understood them or even knew about them, we would be cynical, suspicious, or perhaps, let's call it what it is, afraid of the consequences and the impact that could have if people learned that something as significant as this pandemic had at its origins human error and corporate irresponsibility. That would be an earth-shattering discovery. The other thing, I suppose, that comes up is our relationship with the media and our trust in the media if we learn that stories like this are indeed shaped, even if the theory that it emerged in nature is entirely true, and there's exactly as much evidence for either theory. Then it shows us that if the media is treated as a tool to control public perceptions, and there's no doubt that that is a fact, then it alters the amount of trust we could have. I suppose what conclusions I can draw from this story is that the world of science must be held to an incredibly high standard because of the dominion within which they operate. Because of the risks. And I think it must be difficult to have the kind of ethical standards required when they are entangled with financial imperatives. Financial imperatives, in fact, of pharmaceutical companies that you don't need to research extensively to discover have a pretty murky history when it comes to the relationship between their products and the impact on human beings. We're talking about, just look at some of the cases Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer have dealt with, and I'm not suggesting that any of their current products are problematic. I certainly wouldn't do that. I'm talking about historic facts that are in the public domain. The other thing, I suppose, is that with media, we need media organisations that are able to speak freely. We need to be able to freely disagree with one another in the public space, discuss theories openly. For me, censorship of any kind or propaganda of any kind is a problem. I recognise now that I have a media platform. I'm speaking to you now on social media. So I feel obligated to say, I'm not a scientist. I don't understand any of this stuff. I'm just reading that theory. I'm trying to collate stuff. And all I want to do is present you with information and allow you to draw your own conclusions, because I don't think I'm one iota more intelligent or insightful than any of you. For me, as you know, I'm just interested in an ongoing discourse, freedom of information, freedom of communication. If you like this video and you're watching it on my YouTube channel, please like, please subscribe. Click the notification bell if such a thing appeals to you. And if you're watching it anywhere else, go over to russellbrand.com and sign up to my mailing list. I do live shows all the time. When permitted, I'll be doing actual live shows, and before then I'll be doing live shows on Zoom. And it's important that we can remain in communication so that if it's ever required, we've got direct access to one another. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please comment below. We read the comments and we're interested in getting to the truth, if there is such a thing as truth, and my sense is that there is such a thing as truth. There is complexity in truth always, but it's something that together with free and open discussion, with transparency and with the extraction of economic and financial imperatives, we can perhaps reach together.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Together. Like and subscribe.